The winter wind howled through the pine forests like a wounded beast, carrying with it the bite of early December snow. High in the Colorado Rockies, where the air grew thin and the world seemed to touch the sky, eagles soared between jagged cliff faces dusted white. The mountains stood eternal and unforgiving, their peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds that promised more snow before nightfall. Sarah Whitehorse pulled her worn woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stumbled through the deepening drifts. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each exhalation a small cloud of vapor that the wind snatched away. Behind her, far down the mountain trail, lay the town of Silver Creek, a place that would no longer shelter her, no longer tolerate her presence. They had called her witch, cursed woman, the Apache widow who brought death to her white husband. Her fingers, numb with cold, clutched at the small bundle she carried, a piece of dried bread, some jerked meat, and the bone-handled knife that had belonged to her grandmother. It was all she had managed to grab before the mob had come to her door with torches and accusations. The bruise on her cheek still throbbed where Old Man Morrison had struck her, spittle flying as he screamed about his son's mysterious illness starting the day after she'd walked past their store. "Your husband's dead because of your heathen ways," they had shouted. "Now you're spreading your curse to decent folk." Sarah knew better than to argue. Being half Apache in a white man's town was crime enough. Being a widow whose husband had died under questionable circumstances, found at the bottom of a ravine after a heated argument with the town council about their marriage, had sealed her fate. The fact that Thomas had been drinking heavily that night, that he'd stormed out into a blizzard against her pleas, mattered nothing to them. They needed someone to blame, and she was the perfect target. The trail she followed was barely visible now, just a faint depression in the snow between towering pines. Sarah had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and the lynch mob's fury. Her split lip had stopped bleeding, but she could still taste copper on her tongue. Her dress, torn at the shoulder during her escape, offered little protection against the elements. As the day waned and shadows grew long between the trees, Sarah's strength began to fail. Her foot caught on a hidden root, sending her tumbling forward. She managed to catch herself against a pine trunk, bark rough beneath her palms, but her ankle protested with sharp pain. Still, she pressed on. To stop was to freeze. To freeze was to die. The ravine appeared suddenly, hidden by a drift until she was nearly upon it. Sarah tried to stop, arms windmilling, but her momentum carried her over the edge. She tumbled down the rocky slope, her bundle flying from her grasp, until she landed hard at the bottom. Pain exploded through her left shoulder and ribs. When she tried to move, the world spun sickeningly. Snow began to fall again, heavy flakes that would soon cover any trace of her passage. Sarah lay there, looking up at the darkening sky through the gap in the trees. Perhaps this was fitting. The mountains would claim her as they had claimed Thomas, and the good people of Silver Creek could sleep peacefully knowing the Apache witch was gone. Her eyes drifted closed, consciousness fading like the last light of day. The crack of a breaking branch pierced through her delirium. Then another. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Sarah's eyes fluttered open to see a massive shape looming above her, silhouetted against the gray sky. Fear should have gripped her, but she had nothing left to give. If death had come for her, at least it would end the cold. But death had surprisingly gentle hands. The giant of a man knelt beside her, his face obscured by a thick beard and the shadow of a fur-lined hood. He wore buckskins and heavy furs, the garb of a mountain man who belonged to these peaks more than any town. His eyes, what she could see of them, were the color of deep winter lakes. He didn't speak, not when he carefully examined her injuries, his touch clinical but careful. Not when he fashioned a travois from pine branches and rope he produced from his pack. Not even when he lifted her onto it with a strength that made her feel weightless despite her curves. Sarah wanted to protest, to warn him away from the cursed woman, but her voice wouldn't come. The last thing she remembered was the steady crunch of his boots through snow and the feeling of movement as he pulled her away from death's embrace. She woke to warmth and the scent of wood smoke. Panic seized her as she found herself in an unfamiliar place, a small cabin built from rough-hewn logs, gaps chinked with mud and moss. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on walls adorned with pelts and traps. She lay on a bed of furs near the fire, covered with a heavy bear skin. The man sat at a rough wooden table, his back to her, working on something with steady, methodical movements. He had removed his heavy outer garments, revealing broad shoulders and arms corded with muscle. His hair, she now saw, was dark as her own but shot through with premature silver. When she tried to sit up, pain lanced through her shoulder and ribs. A small sound escaped her lips, barely a whimper, but he heard it. He turned, and she got her first clear look at his face, weathered by wind and sun, marked by lines that spoke of hardship, but younger than she'd first thought. Perhaps 35 winters, only a few more than her own. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pale against his tanned skin. He rose and moved to the hearth, where a pot hung over the flames. Still without speaking, he ladled something into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. The smell of venison stew made her stomach clench with hunger. When she struggled to sit up again, he set the bowl aside and helped her, his hands strong but infinitely careful as he propped her against the wall with rolled furs for support. Sarah watched him warily as he retrieved the bowl and offered it to her. When she reached for it with her right hand, her left arm bound to her body with strips of cloth, he shook his head slightly. Instead, he brought the spoon to her lips himself. Pride warred with necessity. She was no child to be fed, but her body shook with exhaustion and cold. The first taste of hot broth nearly made her weep. She ate slowly, aware of his patient presence, the cabin silent save for the fire's whispers and wind against the walls. When the bowl was empty, he set it aside and pointed to himself, then made a gesture she recognized, the sign for name in the hand talk used by various tribes for trade. Her grandmother had taught her the silent language years ago. Sarah hesitated, then signed back slowly, her movements rusty from disuse. "I am Sarah, Sarah Whitehorse." His eyes showed a flicker of surprise that she knew the signs. He responded, his hands moving with more fluidity than hers. "I am called Samuel. Some call me Bearman. You are safe here." "Why?" she signed, the simple gesture encompassing so many questions. Why save her? Why bring her here? Why care for someone clearly running from something? Samuel studied her for a long moment, then signed, "The mountain does not ask why the snow falls. It simply gives shelter to those who need it." He rose and moved to a shelf, returning with a small pot of something that smelled of pine and herbs. Carefully, he unwound the binding around her shoulder, his face showing no reaction to her inadvertent gasp of pain. The bruising was extensive, purple-black against her copper skin, with the same methodical care he'd shown throughout. He applied the salve, his touch clinical but somehow comforting. When he was done, he rebound her shoulder and helped her lie back down. He pointed to her, then to the bed, then made the sign for rest. The message was clear. She was to stay and heal. Sarah wanted to protest. She had brought enough trouble to one man already. But exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight, and the warmth of the fire was so different from the bitter cold of her flight. Her eyes drifted closed despite her best efforts. She felt rather than saw him move away, heard him add wood to the fire, then settle again at his table. Whatever work occupied him resumed with the same steady rhythm. The domesticity of it, the simple sounds of another human's presence, brought tears she was too tired to shed. As sleep claimed her, one thought drifted through her mind. He hadn't asked why she was alone in the mountains, injured and fleeing, hadn't asked about the bruises that weren't from her fall, hadn't looked at her with suspicion or judgment. He had simply acted, offering shelter as naturally as the mountain itself. And somehow, in this rough cabin with this silent giant of a man, Sarah felt safer than she had in months. The thought followed her down into darkness, where neither cold nor cruel voices could reach. Outside, The snow continued to fall, erasing all traces of her passage, burying the path back to Silver Creek under a blanket of white. The mountains kept their secrets, and in a small cabin where words were unnecessary, two damaged souls began the long winter that would change everything. 3 days passed before Sarah felt strong enough to stand without the walls spinning. She had watched Samuel's routine from her bed of furs, rising before dawn to tend the fire, checking trap lines he'd set around the cabin, preparing simple meals with an economy of movement that spoke of years of solitary living. He never spoke aloud, communicating only through gestures or the fluid hand signs when necessary. On the 4th morning, she dressed in her mended clothes. He had sewn the tear in her dress with the neat, small stitches while she slept, and made her way to the door. Her ankles still protested, but she could walk. It was time to leave. She had imposed on his kindness long enough, and the memory of Silver Creek's hatred still burned fresh. She would not bring that poison to this peaceful place. Samuel stood by the woodpile, axe in hand, splitting logs with powerful swings. He paused when he saw her in the doorway, dressed for travel. His eyes, those deep Winter Lake eyes, took in her determined stance and the way she favored her injured ankle. Sarah signed carefully. "Thank you, I must go now." He set down the axe and approached, stopping a respectful distance away. His hands moved in response. Where? The simple question undid her. Where indeed? She had no family left. Her Apache relatives had scattered after the reservation troubles, and Thomas's death had severed her ties to the white world. She had no money, no prospects, no place that would welcome a woman like her. "Away," she signed finally. "I bring trouble." Samuel studied her for a long moment, then turned and pointed to the sky. Heavy clouds hung low, pregnant with snow. The wind had picked up, rattling the pine branches with increasing force. He didn't need to sign anything more. The message was clear. Another storm was coming. As if to emphasize his point, the first fat flakes began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle snowfall became a curtain of white. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching her escape route disappear, and felt both despair and a traitorous flicker of relief. Samuel moved past her into the cabin, returning with a heavy buffalo robe. He draped it around her shoulders, then gestured for her to come back inside. What choice did she have? The mountain had decided her fate as surely as any human judgment. That evening, as the storm raged outside, Sarah prepared their meal for the first time. She found his stores well organized: dried meat, preserved vegetables, sacks of flour and cornmeal, jars of rendered fat. Her hands remembered her grandmother's teachings as she made fry bread and a simple stew. It was different from his usual fare, seasoned with wild herbs she'd noticed hanging from the rafters. Samuel ate in his customary silence, but she caught him glancing at her with something like surprise. When he finished, he signed, "Good, very good." A tiny warmth bloomed in her chest, the first positive feeling she'd experienced in months. The storm trapped them for a week. During that time, a routine developed. Sarah took over the cooking and inside work, finding satisfaction in creating order within the small space. Samuel continued his outside tasks when weather permitted, always returning with firewood, fresh meat, or winter roots dug from beneath the snow. He began teaching her things: how to set a proper snare for rabbits, the kind that wouldn't let them suffer; how to read the weather in the way the clouds moved over the peaks; how to bank a fire so it would last through the night without constant tending. He demonstrated rather than explained, guiding her hands when necessary, always careful to maintain proper distance. Sarah found herself studying him when he wasn't watching, the way he moved with such deliberate purpose, never wasting effort. The careful way he maintained his tools, oiling traps and sharpening blades with meditative focus. The gentleness he showed when treating a half-frozen sparrow he'd found, warming it by the fire before releasing it once the storm passed. One evening, she noticed him favoring his right shoulder after chopping wood. When he sat at the table to work on repairing a trap, she could see the tension in his muscles. Without thinking, she moved behind him and began to knead the knots she found there, the way her grandmother had taught her. Samuel went absolutely still. For a moment, she thought she'd overstepped, violated some unspoken boundary. Then, slowly, his shoulders relaxed under her touch. She worked in silence, feeling the heat of his skin through his shirt, noting old scars beneath her fingers that spoke of a violent past. When she finished, he turned to look at her. Something passed between them in that glance, a recognition of mutual comfort given and received. He signed, "Thank you," and the simple gesture carried weight beyond the words. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to the wind and thinking about hands. Thomas's hands had been soft, a shopkeeper's hands that had never known hard labor. They had been gentle enough when courting her, but had grown harder with drink and disappointment. The townsmen's hands had been cruel, grasping, leaving bruises like brands on her skin. Samuel's hands were different, scarred and calloused from years of mountain living, powerful enough to snap a man's neck, yet infinitely gentle when tending her wounds or showing her how to hold a skinning knife. Hands that spoke more eloquently than any words. The fever struck him 3 nights later. Sarah woke to the sound of thrashing and realized Samuel's bed, a simple frame in the corner opposite hers, was empty. She found him by the dying fire, shaking with chills despite the sweat that soaked his shirt. His eyes were glazed, unseeing, and words tumbled from his lips. The first she'd heard him speak aloud. "No, can't. The blood. So much blood. Forgive me. Had to protect. The children. Burning. Forgive me." She managed to get him back to his bed, though it took all her strength to guide his stumbling steps as she pulled blankets over his shaking form. She wondered what horrors haunted this gentle giant. What had driven him to seek solitude in these unforgiving peaks? What memories tormented him so that he chose silence over speech? For 2 days and nights, she barely left his side. She spooned broth between his lips when he could swallow, bathed his fever-hot skin with cool cloths, held him down when delirium made him fight invisible enemies. His ravings painted a picture of tragedy, a raid, perhaps, or an Indian attack. Children screaming, a woman's voice calling his name, the crackle of flames and the stench of gunpowder. "Martha," he called out once, the name torn from his throat like a confession. "Martha, I'm sorry, I couldn't save them all." Sarah's heart ached for his pain. She hummed the old songs her grandmother had taught her, the ones meant to soothe troubled spirits. Whether he heard them in his delirium, she couldn't say, but sometimes the melody seemed to calm his thrashing. On the 3rd dawn, the fever broke. Samuel opened clear eyes to find Sarah slumped in a chair beside his bed, one hand resting on his arm as if to anchor him to the world. She'd fallen asleep sitting up, dark circles under her eyes testament to her vigil. He lay still, processing what must have happened. The evidence was clear: the basin of water, the cloths, the cup of willow bark tea she'd been trying to get him to drink. She had stayed, despite having every reason to flee while he was incapacitated. She had stayed and fought for his life, as he had once fought for hers. When she stirred and found him watching her, she signed, "You're awake. Good." He tried to sit up, but she pressed him back with a firm hand. "Rest, eat first." She brought him the same thin broth he'd once fed her, and he submitted to her care with the same reluctant grace she had shown. As she fed him, he noticed her exhaustion, the way her hands trembled slightly from fatigue. When the bowl was empty, he caught her hand before she could move away. His fingers traced signs in her palm, an intimate form of the language. "You stayed. Where would I go?" she signed back, but they both knew it was more than that. He held her gaze, and in the morning light filtering through the small window, she saw clearly what had been growing between them during these snow-locked days. It was in the way his thumb brushed across her knuckles before releasing her hand, in the softness that entered his eyes when he looked at her, in the way her heart beat faster at his touch. That evening, strength somewhat returned. Samuel sat by the fire while Sarah prepared their meal. When she brought him his plate, he caught her wrist gently, guiding her to sit beside him on the bearskin rug rather than at the table. They ate in companionable silence, shoulders almost touching, the fire warming their faces. When their meal was finished and the dishes set aside, Sarah found herself telling him her story in signs and gestures. About her grandmother, the wise woman who had taught her the old ways. About being caught between two worlds, never fully accepted by either. About Thomas, who had seemed like salvation but became another kind of prison. About the baby who had never drawn breath, and how the women of Silver Creek had whispered that God was punishing her for marrying outside her kind. Samuel watched her hands paint her pain in the air, his face revealing nothing but his eyes holding depths of understanding. When she finished, tears streaming down her cheeks for the first time since her flight, he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His palm cupped her face, thumb brushing away tears with infinite tenderness. Then, deliberately, he used his other hand to sign, not cursed, not witch, just woman who has known too much sorrow. The simple acceptance broke something inside her. She leaned into his touch, and he drew her against his chest, holding her while she wept for all she had lost, all she had endured. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, his arms a shelter more solid than any cabin walls. When her tears were spent, she pulled back to look at him. In the firelight, the scar on his face seemed less harsh, and she wondered at the story it told. Without thinking, she reached up to trace it with gentle fingers. He caught her hand, not to stop her but to press it more firmly against his cheek. The moment stretched between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then Sarah made her choice. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, soft and questioning. Samuel went still as stone. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd ruined everything, crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Then his hand slid into her hair, and he was kissing her back, gentle but with a hunger that spoke of years of loneliness, of connection long denied. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, he signed with shaking hands, "I am not whole. The past, it broke things inside me." Sarah caught his hands, stilling them. Then she signed back, slowly and clearly, "We are both broken. Maybe together we make something whole." His smile then was like sunrise after a long winter night, tentative but full of warmth. He drew her back against his side, and they sat watching the fire as the wind sang its ancient song outside. No more words were needed, signed or spoken. In the morning they would face questions about the future, about the world beyond the cabin walls. But tonight, in this small shelter against the storm, two wounded souls had found something they'd thought lost forever, the possibility of healing in each other's arms. The weeks that followed moved with the rhythm of winter days, slow, purposeful, intimate in their isolation. Sarah learned that Samuel's silence was not absolute. Sometimes, in the early morning when he thought she still slept, she heard him humming low melodies while tending the fire. Once, when a rabbit kit caught in his snare was still alive, she heard him murmur, "Easy, little one," as he freed it. But with her, words remained unnecessary. Their communication had evolved into something richer. A glance that said, "I need help with this." A touch on the shoulder that meant, "Rest now, I'll finish." The cabin had become their world, and in it, they moved around each other like dancers who had learned each other's steps. One evening, Sarah decided to prepare something special. She had found wild onions beneath the snow earlier that day, and combined with the venison Samuel had brought home, she could make a stew her grandmother had taught her, one reserved for important occasions among her mother's people. As the fragrant steam filled the cabin, Samuel watched from his seat by the fire, whittling a piece of pine. His movements were sure and practiced, shavings curling away to reveal something taking shape within the wood. When she served the stew, he tasted it slowly, his eyes closing as the flavors reached him. Then he looked at her with such warmth that her breath caught. He set down his spoon and signed, "This is what home tastes like." The word home hung between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah had been here for over a month now. Her injuries had healed, the bruises faded. Spring would come eventually. The snow would melt, and the passes would clear. What then? As if reading her thoughts, Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out what he'd been carving. It was a hair comb, delicately crafted from the pale pine, decorated with a pattern of mountains and stars. He offered it to her with hands that trembled slightly. Sarah took it reverently, running her fingers over the smooth surface. No one had ever made her something so beautiful, so purposeful, among her mother's people. Such a gift had meaning, a declaration of intent, a promise of protection and provision. "Samuel," she sighed, his name feeling sacred in her hands. "I need to tell you about my past, all of it." He nodded, settling back to listen. And so she told him, her hands painting the story in the firelit air. She had been born between worlds, daughter of an Apache woman and a Mexican trader who had disappeared before her birth. Her mother died when she was 12, leaving her in the care of her grandmother. But the old woman passed 3 years later, and Sarah, barely 15, had been taken to work in the household of the Indian agent. "They said it was for my own good," she signed, bitterness creeping into her gestures. "To civilize me, to make me suitable for white society." She told him about the years of servitude disguised as charity, of being neither servant nor family, about Thomas Whitehorse, the shopkeeper's son who had noticed her at 20, courted her with promises of a real home, a real life, how her relief at escaping the agent's household had blinded her to Thomas's weaknesses, his drinking, his gambling, his need to own rather than cherish. "He wasn't cruel at first," she signed, her movements growing smaller, more painful. "But when I lost the baby, something in him changed, or maybe it just revealed what was always there." She told him about the isolation, how the town's women crossed the street to avoid her, whispering about curses and heathen blood, how Thomas's drinking worsened, and with it, his temper. The night he died, he had been raging about her failure to give him children, about the shame of having a barren Apache wife. He'd struck her, then stormed out into the blizzard despite her pleas. "They found him at the bottom of Falcon's Drop the next morning," she signed. "His father said I pushed him, said I used Indian witchcraft to make him fall. The marshal didn't believe it, but it didn't matter. The town had decided." Samuel had remained still throughout her story, his face revealing nothing but his eyes holding depths of understanding. When she finished, he moved closer, taking her hands in his. For a long moment, he simply held them. Then, slowly, he began to sign his own story. His name was Samuel Boone, not his birth name, but the one he'd taken after. He'd been a soldier once, stationed at Fort Bridger. He'd had a wife, Martha, and 2 children, a boy of 6 and a girl of 4. They'd lived in a small settlement near the fort, a place that existed in the fragile peace between military presence and Indian territory. "Raid came while I was on patrol," he signed, his movements sharp with old pain. "Renegade band, mixture of tribes angry about broken treaties. They hit the settlement hard and fast." He'd returned to find the settlement burning, found his home in flames, found Martha and the children. His hands stilled, unable to form the words. Sarah squeezed them gently, understanding without needing the details. "I tracked them," he continued after a moment. "Found their camp. Again his hands paused. "I became something not human that night. When the army found me 3 days later, I was covered in blood and could not speak. Have not spoken since, except in fever dreams." He told her how the army had discharged him quietly, unwilling to court-martial a man driven mad by grief but unable to keep him in service. How he'd wandered for months before finding these mountains, this cabin abandoned by some long-dead trapper. How he'd made it his refuge, his penance, his prison. 7 years I've lived here," he signed. 7 winters alone with the ghosts. Then you fell from the sky like a broken bird, and for the first time, the ghosts grew quiet." Sarah lifted his hands to her lips, kissing each scarred knuckle. "We cannot change our pasts," she signed against his palms, "but perhaps we can choose our future." Samuel drew her into his arms then, holding her with desperate tenderness. She felt him tremble against her, this mountain of a man who had weathered so much finally allowing himself to hope. When he pulled back to look at her, She saw tears on his cheeks, the first she'd witnessed from him. That night, as storm clouds gathered again outside, they moved to his bed together. Not with passion, not yet, but with a need for closeness that transcended physical desire. They lay entwined, her head on his chest, his arms encircling her protectively. For the first time in years, both slept without nightmares. The next morning brought heavy snow and howling wind, another blizzard to lock them in their mountain sanctuary. But the cabin felt different now, warmer, fuller, alive with possibility. Samuel smiled more readily, even laughed silently when Sarah attempted to help with trap maintenance and got her fingers tangled in the mechanism. She began teaching him Apache words, starting with simple things, names for the animals they trapped, the plants they gathered, the weather that ruled their lives. He absorbed them like a man starving for new sounds, even if he only mouthed them silently. In return, he showed her more of his mountain craft, how to read animal sign in the snow, predict weather changes by the way the birds flew, find edible roots even in the depths of winter. One afternoon, as Sarah worked on mending one of his shirts, she began to hum. It was an old song, one her grandmother had sung while working, about two stars that danced across the sky seeking each other. She was surprised when Samuel joined her, his deep voice harmonizing wordlessly with the melody. She stopped, needle suspended in midair. Staring at him, he looked almost bashful. Signing. Music is different, not words. The throat remembers even when the tongue forgets. They sang together often after that, old hymns he remembered from childhood. Apache songs, she taught him. Melodies that seemed to rise from the mountains themselves, their voices twined together in the small cabin, creating something beautiful from their broken pieces. As the winter deepened, so did their connection. They developed their own language, part signs, part touch, part simply knowing. Sarah would wake to find Samuel had left small gifts on her pillow, a perfectly round river stone, a blue jay feather, pine cones arranged in a pattern. She responded by weaving traditional patterns into the clothes she mended for him, marking him as hers in ways he might not even recognize, but that satisfied something deep in her spirit. One night, as they sat by the fire with her teaching him to weave baskets from willow branches she'd gathered, Samuel suddenly set aside his work. He stood and retrieved something from a high shelf, a small wooden box she'd never seen him open. Inside, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, was a silver locket on a delicate chain. He signed. This was Martha's, her mother's before that. I want you to have it. Sarah's hands shook as she took the offering. She understood the weight of this gift. Not just the giving of a valuable object, but the symbolic passing of his heart from the keeping of the dead to the care of the living. Are you sure? She signed. He took the locket from her hands and fastened it around her neck himself, his fingers warm against her skin. Then he framed her face in his hands and kissed her, not the gentle, careful kisses they'd shared before, but something deeper, hungrier, full of promise and need. When they parted, he signed against her lips. The past will always be part of us, but I choose the future. I choose you. That night, the walls that had kept them physically apart finally crumbled. They came together with a desperate tenderness. Two souls who had forgotten they could feel pleasure instead of just pain. In the darkness, with the snow falling silent outside and the fire burning low, they wrote new stories on each other's skin. Tales of redemption and hope and the possibility of love after loss. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Sarah traced the scars on his chest, each one a map of his survival. We match now, she whispered, the first words she'd spoken aloud to him. Both marked, both healing. Samuel pulled her closer, pressing his lips to her hair, and though he didn't speak, she felt his answer in the way he held her, protective, cherishing, permanent, outside. The winter raged on, but inside their small cabin, spring had already begun to bloom in two hearts that had thought themselves forever frozen. The locket lay warm between them, its weight no longer a burden but a bridge, connecting past to present, sorrow to joy. Two broken people who had found in each other the missing pieces of themselves. The thaw came slowly to the high country, revealing the world inch by precious inch. Patches of brown earth appeared like promises between the white, and the sound of running water joined the mountain symphony. Sarah stood at the cabin door one morning, breathing air that held the first hints of green, when Samuel touched her shoulder. "Come," he signed. "I want to show you something." He had been different these past days, lighter somehow, as if the warming weather had melted something frozen inside him. She followed him up a narrow deer trail she hadn't known existed, winding higher into the peaks. The walk was strenuous but beautiful, early wildflowers pushing through where the sun had cleared the snow. They emerged onto a ledge that overlooked the entire valley. The view stole her breath, endless peaks marching into the distance, their snow caps painted gold by the morning sun. Eagles circled below them, riding thermals with effortless grace. But it wasn't the vista that had brought them here. Samuel led her to a small grove of aspens, their bare branches just beginning to bud. In the center, protected by the trees, stood two simple crosses made from pine branches bound with rawhide. The graves they marked were covered with carefully placed stones. "Martha, James, little Mary," he signed, his hands moving slowly, reverently. "I brought them here after. Couldn't leave them in that burned place. Needed them somewhere beautiful, somewhere peaceful." Sarah's eyes filled with tears for his loss, for the love that had driven him to carry his family to this secret sanctuary. She understood now why he had chosen to live as he did, not just in exile, but as a guardian, keeping watch over those he'd failed to protect in life. Samuel knelt between the graves, his large hands gentle as he cleared away winter debris. Sarah knelt beside him, helping tend this sacred space. They worked in silence, but she felt the weight of his trust in sharing this place with her. When they finished, Samuel remained kneeling, his head bowed. Then, so soft she almost missed it, he spoke aloud. "Martha, this is Sarah. She's brought light back into my darkness. I hope you understand." The words, rusty from disuse but clear, made Sarah's heart clench. She placed her hand over his, and together they sat in peaceful communion with the past, the dead, and the bright possibility of the future. That evening, back in the cabin, there was a new ease between them. The secret shared, the blessing sought and perhaps given, had lifted the last barrier. As Sarah prepared their meal, Samuel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Such casual intimacy had become their way, but tonight it felt different, more settled, more sure. "The passes will clear soon," she signed, turning in his arms to face him. He nodded, his eyes serious. "What do you want to do?" It was the first time either had directly addressed what came next. Sarah had thought about it constantly as winter gave way to spring. Part of her wanted to disappear completely, to stay hidden in this mountain paradise where the outside world couldn't touch them. But she knew that wasn't really living. It was just another kind of death. "I want to stop running," she signed. "I want to clear my name, if I can, but—" She hesitated, then continued. "I don't want to lose this. Lose us." Samuel cupped her face in his hands, thumbs stroking her cheekbones. Then he signed, "You won't lose me. Where you go, I go. Your fight is my fight." The simple declaration undid her. She pulled him down for a kiss that was fierce with promise, with gratitude, with love she hadn't dared name until now. When they parted, both breathing hard, she whispered against his lips, "I love you, Samuel Boone." His whole body shuddered at the words. He pulled her tight against him, face buried in her hair, and she felt more than heard his response. "Love you too, Sarah. God help me, I love you too." That night, their lovemaking held a new dimension, not just passion or comfort, but commitment. They moved together with purpose, sealing promises skin to skin, breath to breath. Sarah had never felt so seen, so cherished, so thoroughly claimed. Samuel worshipped her with hands and mouth, patient and thorough, until she shattered apart beneath him, crying out his name. When she returned the favor, mapping his scars with the lips and tongue, learning what made him gasp and tremble. She felt powerful in a way she never had before. They came together with desperate need, her legs wrapped around his waist, her hands fisted in his hair. He moved within her with devastating tenderness, eyes locked on hers, letting her see everything, his love, his fear, his absolute dedication. When release claimed them, it was together, a shared shattering that left them both shaking. Afterward, they lay entwined, sweat cooling on their skin, hearts slowly steadying. Samuel traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, occasionally pressing kisses to her temple. Sarah played with the hair on his chest, marveling at the solid warmth of him, the safety she felt in his arms. "Tell me about before," she said softly. "Before the pain, when you were young." And so he did, voice rough but warming to the task. He told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, youngest of 4 boys, about joining the army to see the world beyond cornfields, about meeting Martha at a dance in Independence, how she'd laughed when he stepped on her feet. Small stories, precious for their ordinariness, painting a picture of a life before it shattered. Sarah shared, too, memories of her grandmother teaching her to identify plants, to read weather sign, to move silent as a shadow through the forest. The feast days when her mother's people would gather, the drums and dancing, feeling connected to something ancient and enduring. The first time she saw snow and thought the sky was falling. They talked until dawn lightened the windows, voices twining together in the quiet cabin. It felt like a new beginning, this sharing of whole selves rather than just broken pieces. When they finally slept, it was deep and peaceful, wrapped around each other like puzzle pieces finally properly fitted. The next weeks passed in a blur of preparation and growing closeness. They ventured farther from the cabin together, Samuel showing her his trap lines, teaching her to read the mountains like a book. Sarah gathered medicinal plants as they emerged, building a pharmacopoeia for whatever came next. They hunted together, fished the streams as ice broke up, worked side by side to repair winter damage to the cabin, but it was the nights that transformed them. Every evening became a celebration of survival, of finding each other, of the love that had grown despite everything. They made love with abandon now, against the cabin wall when passion overtook them suddenly, slow and sweet in the mornings as birds sang the world awake. Deep in the night when nightmares woke one or the other, their bodies learned each other's rhythms, wants, needs. Sarah discovered she could make Samuel moan, actually moan aloud, when she did that thing with her tongue just so. Samuel found that lifting her against him, her back to the wall, made her wild in ways that delighted him. One night, as they lay catching their breath after particularly intense lovemaking, Sarah started giggling. It bubbled up from somewhere deep, unstoppable. Samuel raised an eyebrow in question. "I'm happy," she gasped between giggles. "When did I become happy?" His face transformed with one of his rare, full smiles. He pulled her on top of him, hands spanning her waist, and signed. "Same time I did, I think." She leaned down to kiss him, hair forming a curtain around their faces. "What would the proper people of Silver Creek think?" she murmured against his mouth. "If they could see their witch now?" "Let them think what they want," he growled, voice rough with renewed desire. "You're mine now, mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to love." The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened her. She'd been a possession before, but this was different. This was mutual claiming, mutual belonging. She was his, yes, but he was equally hers, and that made all the difference. As April warmed into May, they made their decision. They would return to Silver Creek, face whatever awaited them there, but not alone. Together, united, strong in their love and determination. Samuel began preparing weapons, cleaning his long unused rifle, sharpening knives. Sarah prepared too, in her own way, gathering herbs that could heal or harm, depending on need. Their last night before leaving the mountain sanctuary, Samuel surprised her. He'd been secretive all day, and when she returned from checking her herb drying racks, the cabin was transformed. Candles flickered on every surface. Wildflowers filled a jar on the table, and the smell of roasting venison filled the air. "What's this?" she asked, wonder in her voice. Samuel took her hand, led her to the table where he'd set 2 places with their best, which wasn't much, but the effort was clear. He signed, "Want to do something right, make a memory for the hard days ahead." They ate by candlelight, feeding each other choice bites, laughing when gravy dripped. When the meal was done, Samuel stood and offered his hand. She took it, let him draw her into his arms. He hummed low in his throat, a waltz tune she recognized, and they danced slowly around the small space, her head on his chest, his chin resting on her hair. "Whatever happens," he said, words coming easier now with practice. "This winter, this spring, it's been worth everything." Sarah pulled back to look up at him, saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. "We're going to be fine," she said firmly. "We survived the winter. We found each other. We can survive anything now." He spun her gently, making her laugh, then drew her close again. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." Later, as they made love for the last time in their mountain refuge, there was sweetness mixed with sorrow, passion tempered by uncertainty. They came together with desperate tenderness, trying to memorize every touch, every taste, every sound. When Sarah cried out her pleasure, Samuel followed, her name a prayer on his lips. They held each other afterward, neither willing to waste their last hours in sleep. Instead, they talked in whispers and signs, planning their approach, preparing for various outcomes, but mostly they simply existed together, skin to skin, heart to heart, storing up warmth and love against whatever cold reception awaited them. As dawn broke over the peaks, painting the world in shades of gold and rose, they rose and dressed. Samuel wore his town clothes, long unused, looking strange and civilized. Sarah wore the dress he'd mended for her, now altered and decorated with subtle beadwork she'd added during the long winter nights. The locket lay bright against her throat. They stood at the door, taking one last look at the cabin that had sheltered their love. Then Samuel took her hand, squeezed it once, and signed. "Ready?" Sarah squeezed back, lifting her chin with determination. "Ready?" Together, they stepped out into the morning light and began the long journey down the mountain, toward judgment, toward justice, toward a future they would face as one. The journey down the mountain took 2 days, each step carrying them closer to civilization and further from their sanctuary. Sarah noticed how Samuel's shoulders tensed more with every mile, his easy mountain grace replaced by watchful readiness. She understood, in the wilderness, the dangers were clean and simple. In town, threats wore human faces and came wrapped in law and righteousness. They camped the first night by a stream, and Sarah woke to find Samuel sitting up, staring into the dying fire. She touched his arm gently, and he signed, "Wondering if I'm leading you into danger, should keep you safe, not take you back to those who hurt you." "We're keeping each other safe," she signed back. "No more running, remember?" He pulled her against his side, and they watched the sun rise together, drawing strength from each other's presence. By late afternoon of the second day, they could see Silver Creek spread below them in the valley. The town looked smaller than Sarah remembered, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the muddy main street. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could make out tiny figures moving between the structures. Somewhere down there were the people who had driven her out, who had blamed her for Thomas's death. Samuel stopped at a grove of cottonwoods just outside town. "Wait here," he signed. "Let me go first. See how things stand." Sarah shook her head firmly. "Together, remember? I won't hide." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. They walked into town side by side, Sarah's hand resting lightly on Samuel's arm. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the street. Their arrival didn't go unnoticed. Mrs. Morrison, sweeping her store's front step, froze mid-motion. Her broom clattered to the ground. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, loud enough to carry. "It's the White Horse Widow." Word spread like wildfire. Doors opened, curtains twitched. People emerged from shops and houses to stare. Sarah kept her head high, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Samuel's presence beside her was solid as a mountain, his hand covering hers on his arm. They made it halfway down Main Street before Sheriff Watson stepped out of his office, hand resting on his pistol. He was a fair man, Sarah remembered, but bound by the law and the will of the town. "Mrs. Whitehorse," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Folks said you were dead, frozen in the mountains. As you can see, Sheriff, I'm very much alive." Sarah replied, proud that her voice remained steady. Watson's eyes moved to Samuel, taking in his size, the way he positioned himself slightly in front of Sarah. "And you are?" "Samuel Boone," Samuel said, his voice rough from disuse but clear. "The lady is under my protection." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd. The witch had returned with a protector, a giant of a man who looked like he could tear apart anyone who threatened her. "There's still the matter of your husband's death," Watson said to Sarah. "His father swore out a complaint, said you had something to do with Thomas falling from that cliff." "Then let's settle this properly," Sarah said. "I want to face my accuser. Let the truth be heard." Old man Morrison pushed through the crowd, his face red with rage. "You dare show your face here? Witch! After what you did to my boy?" "I did nothing to Thomas except try to love him," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly. "Despite his drinking, despite his anger, despite—" She touched her face where the bruise had long faded. "His fists!" "Liar!" Morrison spat. "My boy never raised a hand to no woman." "Then how do you explain the bruises the doctor saw?" a voice called out. Sarah turned to see Dr. Henley standing in his doorway. "I treated Mrs. Whitehorse more than once for injuries, told Thomas he needed to control his temper." This was unexpected support. Sarah felt Samuel shift slightly, his posture easing from attack to mere readiness. Morrison's face grew redder. She provoked him with her heathen ways, her failure to give him children. "A man has rights. A man has no right to beat his wife," Samuel said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Whatever her blood, whatever her ways." "And who are you to say?" Morrison snarled. "Her new man? Another fool taken in by her witch ways?" Samuel stepped forward, and the crowd stepped back. There was something dangerous in his movement, controlled violence held in check by will alone. "I'm someone who knows the difference between truth and convenient lies. The lady's husband died because he was drunk and stumbled off a cliff in a snowstorm. You know it, the sheriff knows it, the whole town knows it, but it's easier to blame her than admit your son wasn't the man you wanted him to be." "How dare you!" Morrison started forward, but Watson stepped between them. "Enough," the sheriff said. "This is a matter for the law, not mob justice." He looked at Sarah. "Mrs. Whitehorse, I'll need you to come to the office. Answer some questions, official-like." Sarah nodded, but Samuel signed quickly. "I'm coming with you." "That's fine," Watson said, proving he was indeed observant. "Might be good to have a witness." They followed the sheriff to his office, the crowd parting reluctantly. Sarah heard the whispers following them. Witch, savage, shameless. But she also heard other voices, quieter but present. Poor woman. Thomas was a mean drunk. About time someone stood up to old Morrison. In the sheriff's office, Watson gestured for them to sit. He pulled out a file, thin and worn. "Truth is, Mrs. Whitehorse, I never put much stock in Morrison's accusations. Too many folks saw Thomas that night, drunk as a lord, saying he was going to show that Apache witch who's boss. But Morrison has influence, and without you here to defend yourself." "So what happens now?" Samuel asked. Watson leaned back in his chair. "Way I see it, we got two choices. I can arrest Mrs. Whitehorse, hold a trial, let folks testify. Could go either way, depending on the jury, or—" He paused, studying them. "You folks could leave town, quiet-like, start fresh somewhere else." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "I've done nothing wrong. I won't run again." The sheriff sighed. Figured you'd say that. All right then. Trial it is. I'll need to take you into custody. She stays with me, Samuel said, his tone brooking no argument. I'll stand her bond, whatever it is. Watson studied him for a long moment. You got that kind of money, Mr. Boone? Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, setting it on the desk with a heavy think. 7 years of fur trapping, that should cover it. The sheriff opened the pouch, whistled low. More than enough. He looked between them. You sure about this? Morrison won't make it easy. He'll dig up every piece of dirt he can find, try to turn the town against her. Let him try, Samuel said simply. They left the sheriff's office to find the crowd had grown. But now Sarah noticed something different. Not everyone looked hostile. Some of the women, particularly, watched with what might have been sympathy. Mrs. Henley, the doctor's wife, even nodded slightly when Sarah caught her eye. Watson had given them permission to stay at the boarding house, but Mrs. Pritchard, who ran it, stood in her doorway with arms crossed. I don't rent rooms to her kind, she said loudly. Playing to the crowd? Then we'll camp outside town, Samuel said. He looked at the gathering. Anyone tries to visit us in the night, they'll regret it. The threat was delivered calmly, but no one doubted he meant it. The crowd began to disperse, the show over for now. As they walked back through town toward the Cottonwood Grove, a small voice called out, Mrs. Whitehorse. Sarah turned to see Annie Sullivan, the seamstress's daughter, hurrying toward them. The girl was perhaps 17, pretty but with nervous eyes. She glanced around, then pressed something into Sarah's hand, a small, wrapped bundle. Mama said to give you this. She whispered, said you were kind to her when she was sick last winter, gave her medicine when Doc Henley's ran out. She fled before Sarah could respond. In the grove, as Samuel set up camp with practiced efficiency, Sarah unwrapped the bundle. Inside was fresh bread, cheese, and dried apples, and a note. Not everyone believes Morrison's lies. Be strong. Justice will come. A friend. See? Samuel signed as he built the fire. You have allies. We just need to find them. That night, as they lay together under the stars, Sarah felt a mix of fear and hope. The trial would be hard. Morrison would be vicious. But she wasn't alone. Samuel's arm tightened around her as if reading her thoughts. Whatever happens, he murmured against her hair, we face it together. The next days were a blur of preparation. Watson proved surprisingly helpful, suggesting they talk to certain townspeople who might testify in Sarah's favor. Samuel accompanied her everywhere, his presence both protective and calming. They spoke with Dr. Henley, who agreed to testify about Sarah's injuries. The owner of the general store admitted Thomas often came in drunk, raging about his worthless Apache wife. Even the saloon keeper, rougher than most, said he'd had to throw Thomas out multiple times for threatening violence. But it was Maria Santos, the Mexican woman who did laundry for the town, who provided the most damning testimony. She came to their camp at dusk, shawl pulled low over her face. I saw him that night, she said in accented English. Senor Thomas. He was very drunk, very angry. He said terrible things about what he would do to you. I followed, worried. I saw him try to take the shortcut over Falcon's Drop. I called out warning, but he cursed at me, said mind my own business. Then he slipped. You saw him fall? Sarah asked, hope rising in her chest. Maria nodded. See, no one pushed. He fell because he was drunk and angry and stupid. I told Sheriff Watson, but... She shrugged. Who listens to a Mexican washerwoman? They'll listen now, Samuel said firmly. The trial was set for the following week. As word spread, more people came forward, quietly, carefully. But they came. Women who had suffered their own bruises, who understood too well the fear of a drunken husband. Men who had witnessed Thomas's rages but hadn't wanted to interfere in private matters. Morrison fought back. Of course, he hired a lawyer from Denver. Spread rumors about Sarah practicing dark magic in the mountains, about Samuel being her familiar spirit. But the truth has a way of shining through lies. especially when enough people find the courage to speak it. The night before the trial, Samuel found Sarah sitting by their fire, staring into the flames. He sat beside her, taking her hand. "Scared?" he signed. "Terrified," she admitted. "But also ready to stop being afraid. Ready to speak my truth." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing each knuckle. "Proud of you. So proud." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, she had this: the crackle of fire, the whisper of wind in the cottonwoods, and the love of a good man who had chosen to stand beside her. "Samuel," she said softly, "whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for believing me, for fighting for me, for loving me." He turned her face to his, kissing her deeply. When they parted, he signed against her palm, where only she could feel it. Always, forever, no matter what. They made love there by the fire, under the vast Montana sky, consecrating their bond with passion and tenderness. It was a claiming and a promise, a declaration that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it as one. As dawn approached, bringing the day of judgment, they held each other close, ready for battle, strong in their love and their truth, the mountain man and the Apache widow, no longer running, no longer hiding, finally ready to demand justice in a world that had tried to break them both. The courthouse in Silver Creek was packed to capacity on the morning of the trial. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls, craning their necks for a better view. The air was thick with tension and the smell of too many bodies in too small a space. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, Samuel beside her, his presence a solid comfort in the chaos. Judge Harrison, brought in from the county seat to ensure impartiality, was a stern man with silver hair and sharp eyes. He banged his gavel repeatedly to quiet the crowd. "This is a court of law, not a circus," he declared. "Anyone who cannot maintain proper decorum will be removed." Morrison's hired lawyer, a slick man named Garrett from Denver, stood first. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that Sarah Whitehorse, through malice and unnatural means, caused the death of her husband, Thomas Whitehorse. We will show a pattern of behavior consistent with the practices of witchcraft." Objection. The young lawyer Watson had found for Sarah interrupted. James McKenna was fresh from law school, eager to make a name for himself. "Witchcraft is not a recognized legal charge in the territory of Montana." "Sustained," Judge Harrison said dryly. "Mr. Garrett, please confine yourself to actual legal matters." Garrett smoothed his vest. "Of course, Your Honor. We will prove murder, pure and simple." The prosecution began with Morrison himself. The old man took the stand with theatrical grief, describing his son as a good Christian man, led astray by an Apache temptress. He spoke of strange smells from their home, of Thomas complaining about mysterious illnesses after eating his wife's cooking. She isolated him from his family. Morrison declared, used her heathen ways to control him, and when he finally tried to break free, she killed him. McKenna's cross-examination was ruthless in its simplicity. "Mr. Morrison, did you ever actually see Mrs. Whitehorse harm your son?" "I didn't need to see. Yes or no? Sir, did you witness any violence from Mrs. Whitehorse toward Thomas?" Morrison's face reddened. "No, but did your son drink, Mr. Morrison? A man has a right to— Did he drink heavily, yes or no? Sometimes. How often did he come to your store intoxicated?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "I don't recall." McKenna produced a ledger. "Would it refresh your memory to know that your own clerk recorded 17 incidents in the past year of Thomas being too drunk to conduct business?" The questioning continued, each answer chipping away at Morrison's narrative. By the time he left the stand, his grief seemed less righteous, more like the anger of a man refusing to accept hard truths about his son. Garrett called other witnesses, townspeople who spoke of Sarah's unnatural knowledge of herbs, her suspicious Apache heritage, the convenient timing of Thomas's death. But McKenna countered each with facts, The herbs were common medicinal plants used by many frontier women. Her heritage was not a crime, and as for timing, Thomas had been threatening divorce for months, which would have left Sarah with nothing, hardly a motive for murder. Then came the defense's turn. Doctor. Henley took the stand, his testimony clinical and damning. He described treating Sarah for bruises, a cracked rib, a split lip. "I told Thomas he needed to control his temper," the doctor said. "He laughed and said a man had the right to discipline his wife however he saw fit." "Did Mrs. Whitehorse ever show signs of violence?" McKenna asked. "Never. She was always soft-spoken, always concerned about not causing trouble. If anything, she was too accepting of her treatment." Maria Santos testified next, her account of that fatal night clear and unwavering despite Garrett's attempts to discredit her. "I saw what I saw," she said firmly. "Mr. Thomas, he fell because he was drunk and angry and not watching where he walked. No one pushed him, no magic, just a drunk man and a dangerous path." The saloon keeper confirmed Thomas's state that night. He'd been drinking since noon, going on about teaching his wife a lesson. "I finally cut him off and he stormed out. Could barely walk straight." Then Sarah herself took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she rose, Samuel's hand briefly touching hers in support. She walked to the witness chair with quiet dignity, the silver locket at her throat catching the light. "Mrs. Whitehorse," McKenna began gently, "tell us about your marriage to Thomas." Sarah spoke softly but clearly, her voice carrying in the hushed room. She told of meeting Thomas when she was 20, desperate to escape the Indian agent's household where she was neither family nor truly servant, of Thomas's initial kindness, his promises of a real home. "When did things change?" McKenna asked. "After we lost the baby," Sarah said, her voice catching slightly. "I was 4 months along when I fell down the stairs. The doctor said it wasn't my fault, but Thomas blamed me, said it was punishment for marrying outside God's plan." She described the escalating violence, the isolation, the constant fear. Several women in the gallery wiped their eyes, recognizing their own stories in hers. "Did you ever fight back?" McKenna asked. "No. I was raised to be respectful, obedient, and I had nowhere to go. Who would take in an Apache widow?" "Tell us about the night Thomas died." Sarah's hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He'd been drinking since morning. He was angry about money, about the baby we'd lost, about everything. He struck me, tore my dress, said he was going to beat the savage out of me once and for all. Then he stormed out into the blizzard. I begged him not to go. The weather was too dangerous, but he wouldn't listen." "Did you follow him?" "No, I was hurt, frightened. I barred the door and prayed he'd find shelter somewhere else until he sobered up. The next morning, they found him at the bottom of Falcon's Drop." Garrett rose for cross-examination, his smile sharp. "Mrs. Whitehorse, is it true you know which plants can poison a man?" "I know which plants can heal and which can harm. Yes, my grandmother taught me. It's knowledge many frontier women have." "Did you ever use this knowledge against your husband?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I used it to make poultices for his hangovers and teas to calm his temper. I tried to help him, not harm him. Yet he's dead, and you're here with another man. Rather convenient, wouldn't you say?" Samuel started to rise, but Sarah's slight gesture stopped him. "What's convenient? Mr. Garrett is blaming a woman for a man's own choices. Thomas chose to drink. He chose violence. He chose to go out in a blizzard rather than face his own failures. I grieve the man he could have been, but I won't take responsibility for the man he was." A murmur ran through the crowd, surprise at her eloquence, her strength. This was not the beaten-down woman they'd expected. The trial continued into the afternoon. Character witnesses spoke for both sides, but the tide had clearly turned. When Samuel took the stand, his testimony was brief but powerful. "I found Mrs. Whitehorse injured and near death in the mountains," he said, his rarely used voice commanding attention. "She'd been beaten and driven out by people who needed someone to blame. In the months since, I've come to know her as a woman of integrity, kindness, and strength. The only crime she's guilty of is surviving. As the sun began to set, both lawyers made their closing arguments. Garrett painted a picture of a manipulative woman who used her foreign ways to ensnare and ultimately murder an innocent man. But McKenna's response was devastating in its simplicity. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard a lot about what people think, what they suspect, what they fear. But what have you heard in terms of facts? Thomas Whitehorse was a violent drunk who beat his wife. Multiple witnesses saw him intoxicated and threatening violence the night he died. One witness saw him fall. No push, no magic. Just a drunk man on a dangerous path. The only mystery here is why it took so long for someone to tell the truth. Judge Harrison sent the jury to deliberate as darkness fell. The courtroom emptied slowly, people clustering in groups to discuss what they'd heard. Sarah and Samuel waited in a small antechamber, her hand in his, drawing strength from each other. Whatever happens, Samuel signed. We did the right thing. You stood up. You spoke truth. Sarah leaned into him. I couldn't have done it without you. You could have. He signed back. You're stronger than you know. I just reminded you of it. It took the jury less than an hour. When they filed back in, Sarah's heart hammered so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The foreman, an older rancher named Peterson, stood. We find the defendant, Sarah Whitehorse, not guilty of all charges. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered. Others shouted in protest. Morrison lurched to his feet, face purple with rage. This is a travesty. You're letting a murderer walk free. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Mr. Morrison, you will control yourself or be held in contempt. But Morrison was beyond control. He lunged toward Sarah, spittle flying. Witch! Murderer! You killed my boy! Samuel moved faster than seemed possible for such a large man. He caught Morrison's wrist before the old man's hand could reach Sarah, holding it with controlled strength. Your son is dead because of his own choices, Samuel said, his voice carrying over the chaos. You want someone to blame? Look in the mirror. You raised a man who thought his fists were the answer to everything. Now live with it. Sheriff Watson and his deputies moved in, separating the men. Morrison was led out, still screaming threats and accusations. Judge Harrison restored order with effort. Mrs. Whitehorse, the judge said, you are free to go, and may I say, you've shown remarkable courage and dignity throughout this ordeal. I hope this town learned something from it. As they left the courthouse, Sarah found their path blocked, not by an angry mob, but by a group of women, Mrs. Henley stepped forward, speaking for them all. We're sorry, she said simply. We should have spoken up sooner, should have helped you when things were bad. We knew, but we were cowards. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. We all do what we must to survive. Still, Annie Sullivan's mother said, if you're staying in town, know that you have friends now, real friends. But Sarah looked at Samuel, saw the answer in his eyes. Thank you, she said, but I think it's time for a fresh start somewhere else. The women nodded understanding. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah noticed something that made her heart lift. Not everyone was looking at her with suspicion anymore. Some nodded respectfully. Some even smiled. The truth, once spoken, had shifted something fundamental in the town's conscience. That night, in their camp by the cottonwoods, Sarah and Samuel sat by the fire planning their future. The trial was over. Justice served. But Silver Creek would always hold painful memories. Where do you want to go? Samuel signed. Sarah considered. Somewhere we can build something new. Maybe help others who need it. A way station. Like we talked about. Somewhere between towns, between worlds. For people who don't quite fit in either. Samuel smiled, the expression transforming his scarred face. I know just the place. There's a valley 2 days north, right on the main trail to Montana territory. Good water, shelter, far enough from town to be peaceful, but close enough to get supplies. And your family? Sarah asked gently. The graves? I'll visit. he signed. "But they're at peace now, and I think Martha would want me to live. Not just exist. She'd want me to help others the way I couldn't help them." They made love that night with a new tenderness, a celebration not just of survival but of possibility. Under the stars, with the cottonwoods whispering overhead, they consecrated their plans with passion and promise. Within a week, they had gathered supplies and said their goodbyes. Dr. Henley provided medical supplies and books. The women who had apologized contributed blankets, preserves, and a promise to send word if anyone needed shelter. Even Sheriff Watson seemed relieved to see them choosing a new path. "You did a brave thing," he told Sarah as they prepared to leave. "Not many would have had the courage to come back and face all that." "I had help," Sarah said, glancing at Samuel. Watson smiled. "We all need that sometimes. Good luck to you both." As they rode out of Silver Creek for the last time, Sarah felt no sadness, only anticipation. Behind them lay pain and prejudice, false accusations and hard-won justice. Ahead lay possibility, a chance to build something good from the ashes of their separate griefs. Morrison watched from his store window, his face twisted with bitter rage. But his was a lone voice now. The town had heard the truth and chosen justice over comfortable lies. It would take time for all the wounds to heal, but a beginning had been made. Sarah reached over and took Samuel's hand as they rode side by side into the morning sun. He squeezed back, and in that simple touch was everything: love, support, shared purpose, and the promise of a future written by their own hands. The witch of Silver Creek was gone. In her place rode Sarah Boone, survivor, healer and partner to a man who had found his voice again in defending her. Together, they would build something new and necessary. A refuge for the lost, the different, the wounded. A place where broken people could find wholeness, just as they had found it in each other. The valley Samuel had remembered was perfect, a broad meadow cradled between gentle hills, with a clear stream running through it and plenty of timber for building. The main trail to Montana Territory passed within a quarter-mile, close enough to help travelers, but far enough to maintain peace. They arrived in late spring, when wildflowers painted the grass in brilliant colors and the air hummed with possibility. "Here," Samuel signed, standing on a slight rise that overlooked both the trail and the stream. "Good sight lines, water close, protection from winter winds." Sarah turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. After the cramped cabin in the mountains, the openness felt like freedom. "It's perfect," she breathed. "We can build something good here." They started with the basics, a lean-to for temporary shelter while they worked on something more permanent. Samuel's skills with an axe and Sarah's eye for organization made them an efficient team. Within 2 weeks, they had the foundation laid for a modest but sturdy cabin. Larger than Samuel's mountain retreat, but still manageable for 2 people. Their first visitor came while they were raising the walls. A lone rider, slumped in his saddle, horse wandering off the trail toward the smell of their cook fire. Samuel spotted him first, hand moving instinctively to his rifle before he saw the man's condition: fevered, barely conscious, clearly in no shape to be a threat. Together, they helped him down, Sarah immediately checking for wounds while Samuel tended the exhausted horse. The man was young, maybe 20, burning with fever and muttering incoherently about missing an important delivery. "Trail fever," Sarah diagnosed, recognizing the symptoms. "He needs rest, fluids, and willow bark tea." They made him comfortable in their lean-to, and Sarah began the careful work of nursing him back to health. It took 3 days before his fever broke, another 2 before he could speak coherently. "Name's Pete Morrison," he said weakly, then noticed Sarah's slight flinch. "No relation to the Silver Creek Morrisons. Ma'am, I'm from Kansas Way." As he recovered, Pete told them about his job carrying mail between settlements, how he'd pushed too hard trying to make up time after spring floods delayed him. "Foolish," he admitted. "But folks are counting on their letters." When he was well enough to travel, Pete tried to pay them. Samuel refused with a gesture, but the young man insisted on leaving something. "Then let me spread word," he said. "Travelers ought to know there's a safe place here. Good folks who'll help those in need. And spread word he did. Within a month, they had helped 2 more travelers, a family whose wagon axle broke and a trapper with the infected wound. Word traveled along the trail faster than any mail service. Soon, people began seeking them out deliberately. By midsummer, their cabin was complete. 2 rooms with a loft, a proper hearth, windows with real glass that Samuel had traded for. They added a small barn for horses, a smokehouse for preserving meat. And Sarah started an extensive garden with both food plants and medicinal herbs. The pattern of their days developed naturally. Samuel hunted, maintained the buildings, and helped mail travelers with repairs and trail advice. Sarah gardened, cooked, and provided medical care with increasing skill. In the evenings, they worked together, Samuel building furniture while Sarah sewed curtains and blankets, preparing for the inevitable winter guests. One hot August afternoon, a different kind of visitor arrived. The wagon was painted bright colors, and the man driving it wore clothes that had seen better days but retained a certain theatrical flair. "Professor Elias Thornton," he announced with a sweeping bow. "Purveyor of knowledge, seller of stories, and currently, I'm afraid, rather down on my luck." His traveling library and medicine show had hit hard times. His partner had run off with the cash box, leaving him with a wagon full of books, some legitimate medicines, and nowhere to go. "I don't suppose," he said hopefully. "You folks might need a teacher." Sarah and Samuel exchanged glances. They'd already had several families stop by, and Sarah had noticed the children's hunger for stories, for learning. "You can stay," Samuel said after a moment. "Help out, see how it goes." Thornton proved to be a godsend, educated but humble. He took on any task without complaint. More importantly, he began teaching anyone who wanted to learn. Trail children passing through, a few local homesteader kids whose parents brought them by, even Sarah, who devoured his books on anatomy and modern medicine. Their way station grew organically. They built a bunkhouse for travelers, simple but clean. A family heading west liked the valley so much they homesteaded nearby. Then another. Before the first snow, they had the beginnings of a community, not a town exactly, but a loose collection of folks who looked out for each other. Winter brought its own challenges and rewards. The trail traffic slowed, but didn't stop. They sheltered a Methodist minister and his wife, fleeing a cholera outbreak. 2 Chinese railroad workers heading home after years of labor. A black cavalry veteran seeking a new life in Canada. Each brought stories, skills, gratitude. One memorable December night, with snow falling thick outside. Their main room was full, the minister's wife teaching Sarah a new quilting pattern, the veteran and Samuel comparing tracking techniques, Thornton regaling the Chinese men with badly pronounced attempts at their language while they laughed and corrected him. The warmth in the room had nothing to do with the roaring fire. "This is what you dreamed of." Samuel signed to Sarah later as they prepared for bed in their small private room. "A place for everyone who doesn't fit." "We dreamed it," she corrected, pulling him close. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." Their love had deepened with the sharing of purpose. They moved together now with the ease of long partnership, anticipating each other's needs, communicating in glances and touches. The passion remained. Sarah still caught her breath when Samuel emerged from the stream after bathing, water streaming down his muscled torso. Samuel still watched her with hungry eyes when she let down her hair at night, but it was tempered now with something richer, true partnership, shared dreams made real. Spring brought unexpected news. A letter arrived, carried by their old friend Pete, addressed to Sarah in an unfamiliar hand. She opened it with trembling fingers. Samuel reading over her shoulder, "Dear Mrs. Whitehorse." It began, "You don't know me, but I knew your grandmother, Maria Crow Feather. I am her cousin, Joseph Crow Feather, living now on the Crow Reservation. Word has reached us of your courage in seeking justice, and of the good work you do now. Your grandmother would be proud. If you wish, you would be welcome to visit us, to reconnect with your mother's people. The blood remembers, even when the path has been long." Sarah read it 3 times before the tears came. Samuel held her as she wept, for the family she'd thought lost, for the possibility of belonging, for the full circle of her journey. "We should go," he signed when her tears were spent. "When the weather warms." "We?" she asked. "They might not." "You are my wife in all but law," he signed firmly. "Where you go, I go. If they cannot accept that, it's their loss." But first, there was work to finish. They had promised to help the minister and his wife build their own cabin nearby. The couple had decided to stay and start a small school. The Chinese workers, too, had changed plans, using their saved wages to open a small trading post that served both travelers and the growing community. One evening in late spring, as Sarah worked in her herb garden, she heard an unusual sound, Samuel laughing, not the silent shake of shoulders she'd grown accustomed to, but actual laughter, rich and warm. She found him by the corral, watching Thornton try to stay on an ornery mule. "The beast has opinions," Thornton shouted, clinging desperately as the mule bucked. "Strong opinions." Samuel laughed again, the sound rusty but real. When he caught sight of Sarah, something shifted in his face. He walked to her, took her hands, and spoke aloud. "Marry me." Sarah's breath caught. "Samuel, properly," he continued, voice growing stronger with each word. "The minister can do it. Make it real in law, not just in heart." "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes!" He swept her up, spinning her around as he had that night in the cabin, both of them laughing now. Thornton, having finally conquered or been conquered by the mule, applauded dramatically from his undignified position on the ground. They married on a perfect June morning, surrounded by their makeshift family of travelers and settlers. Sarah wore a dress the minister's wife had helped her make, beaded with patterns that honored both her Apache heritage and her new life. Samuel spoke his vows aloud, voice clear and strong, promising to love, protect, and stand beside her always. The celebration lasted all day. The Chinese men contributed fireworks they'd been saving. Thornton performed dramatic readings. The veteran played his harmonica. Children ran wild through the meadow, their laughter mixing with the music and voices of a dozen different backgrounds, all brought together by this place of second chances. That night, alone at last, in their room, Samuel and Sarah came together as husband and wife-in-law as they'd long been in spirit. Their lovemaking was tender and fierce by turns, a celebration of survival, of love found in the ashes of loss, of dreams made real through courage and determination. "My wife," Samuel murmured against her skin, voice full of wonder. "My husband," she replied, then gasped as he showed her once again how precious she was to him. As dawn broke, they lay entwined, watching light creep across their room. Outside, they could hear the early stirrings of their community, the minister's rooster crowing, Thornton singing off-key as he started the coffee, horses nickering for their breakfast. "Ready for the next adventure?" Samuel asked, referring to their planned trip to the Crow Reservation. Sarah traced the scar on his face, then kissed it gently. "With you, I'm ready for anything." They rose and dressed, moving into their day with the easy rhythm of partnership. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. Not everyone would understand or accept what they'd built here, this place where race and past mattered less than character and need. But they'd faced worse and survived. At breakfast, surrounded by their chosen family, Sarah caught Samuel's eye across the crowded table. He winked, actually winked, making her laugh. The mountain man who wouldn't speak had found his voice again. The Apache widow who'd been called a witch had found her calling as a healer. Together, they'd built something beautiful from their broken pieces. Outside, the sun climbed over the mountains, painting their valley in gold. The trail brought new faces, new stories, new chances to help and heal. And at the heart of it all, two people who'd learned that love wasn't just about finding someone to save you. It was about finding someone to build with, dream with, face the world with. The way station thrived, a beacon of hope on a sometimes harsh frontier. And in years to come, when travelers shared tales of their journeys, Many would speak of the place in the valley where a silent man and an Apache woman offered shelter to any in need, where broken people found wholeness, where love proved stronger than any curse or tragedy. But all that was the future. For now, there was coffee to drink, guests to tend, a garden to water, a life to live fully and without fear. Sarah reached for Samuel's hand under the table, felt him squeeze back, and smiled. They were home. 10 years had passed since Sarah and Samuel first built their way station in the valley. The small cluster of buildings had grown into a thriving rest stop known throughout the territory as Boone's Station, a place where weary travelers found more than just food and shelter. They found hope. The morning sun cast long shadows across the expanded compound as Sarah emerged from their cabin, now weathered to a comfortable silver gray. At 41, streaks of silver touched her own dark hair, and laugh lines mapped years of joy around her eyes. She moved with the confidence of a woman who had found her place in the world, the locket at her throat catching the light. "Morning, Mrs. Boone," called out Jake Patterson, the blacksmith who'd set up shop 3 years back. "That boy of yours already has my forge fired up." Sarah smiled. That boy was William Two Rivers, a 15-year-old Lakota orphan they'd taken in 5 winters ago after his family died of fever. He wasn't the only one. Their home had become a haven for lost children over the years. Mary Chen, daughter of Chinese railroad workers killed in a blast. Little Tom Watson, abandoned at their door as an infant. Rebecca Standing Bear, whose white father and Apache mother had died in a range war, leaving her belonging nowhere. The children called them Mama Sarah and Papa Sam, and if anyone thought it strange to see such a mixed family, they kept their opinions to themselves at Boone's Station. Sarah found Samuel in the new schoolhouse, helping Thornton, now Professor Thornton, to 24 regular students, repair a broken desk. Her husband moved with the same quiet strength as always, though his hair was more silver than brown now. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that still made her heart skip. "The Patterson wagon arrives today," she signed, and he nodded. They were expecting the blacksmith's brother and his family, refugees from a failed mining town seeking a fresh start. The morning passed in familiar rhythm. Sarah tending her expanded herb garden and checking on patients in the small infirmary they'd built. Samuel working with William at the forge, the other children helping with chores or attending lessons. The compound hummed with purposeful activity. It was Mary who spotted the dust cloud first. "Riders coming, lots of them." Samuel was already moving, rifle in hand but held casually. They'd had little trouble over the years. Most folks respected what they'd built. But caution was wisdom on the frontier. The group that emerged from the dust wasn't what they expected. 20 riders, a mix of white settlers and cavalry soldiers, led by a face Sarah recognized with a chill, Judge Morrison, Thomas's younger brother, wearing a territorial marshal's badge. "Well, well," Morrison said, dismounting with theatrical slowness. "The witch and her pet savage, still playing house. I see." Samuel stepped forward, but Sarah touched his arm. This was her fight first. "Marshal Morrison," she said evenly, "what brings you to our station?" "Got reports of harboring fugitives." He sneered. "Seems you're running quite the operation here. Indians, Chinese, mixed breeds, all manner of undesirables. We offer shelter to travelers in need." Sarah replied, "Nothing more, nothing less." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "That's not how I heard it. Word is you're teaching savages to read, treating them equal to white folks. That's not just unseemly, it's dangerous to the natural order." The children had gathered on the schoolhouse porch, Thornton trying to herd them inside. Morrison's gaze fell on them, and his sneer deepened. "What abomination is this? White children mixing with their brothers and sisters," Samuel interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of years of leadership. "These children are family. They're loved, educated, and prepared for whatever life brings. That threatens you." "Don't talk to me about family, mountain man," Morrison spat. "You're living in sin with this witch, collecting cast-offs and calling it noble." "Actually," Thornton interjected, approaching with papers in hand, Mr. and Mrs. Boone were legally married 10 years ago. I have the documentation here, properly filed with the territorial government. As for the children, each adoption is likewise legal and documented. Morrison's face darkened. Papers don't make it right, and they won't protect you when decent folks decide they've had enough. Is that a threat, Marshal? Sheriff Watson's voice cut through the tension. The lawman from Silver Creek had arrived with the Patterson wagon, planning to visit his namesake, the baby Sarah had named for him out of gratitude for his fairness during her trial. Morrison turned, surprised. Watson, this isn't your jurisdiction. Maybe not, Watson said, dismounting slowly. But threatening peaceful citizens is wrong in any jurisdiction. These folks have built something good here. They've helped hundreds of travelers, saved lives, given homes to children who had none. What exactly is your complaint? They're undermining the proper way of things, Morrison exploded. Teaching Indians and Chinese as if they're equal to whites. That woman practices heathen medicine alongside Christian healing. And him, he pointed at Samuel. He's turned his back on his own kind. Seems to me, Watson said mildly, that helping folks regardless of their color is more Christian than anything I've seen from some so-called proper people. A murmur of agreement came from the gathered residents. The minister and his wife had emerged from the school, along with several traveling families who'd stopped for rest. The crowd was diverse: white settlers, black freedmen heading west, a Jewish peddler, Native Americans from various tribes. All had found welcome at Boone's station. Morrison's hand moved toward his gun. I've got authority, and I've got this, Samuel said, producing a letter from the territorial governor, thanking us for our service to travelers and granting this station official recognition as a territorial waypoint. You have no authority here unless we're breaking the law, are we? Morrison read the letter, his face growing redder with each line. The governor, a practical man who valued the station's role in safe travel, had indeed provided official protection. This isn't over. Morrison snarled. My brother's blood cries out for justice. Your brother's blood was poisoned by whiskey and hate, Sarah said quietly. I've spent 10 years helping others heal from the kind of pain he caused. That's my justice, building something good where he tried to destroy. Morrison remounted, gesturing sharply to his men. This place is a blight on the territory. Don't think that paper will protect you forever. As they rode away, Sarah felt Samuel's arm come around her shoulders. He'll be back, she signed. Let him come. Samuel replied, We've faced worse. That evening, the station was fuller than usual. Word of the confrontation had spread, and neighbors had come to show support. The main hall rang with voices in multiple languages, children of different backgrounds playing together, adults sharing food and stories. Sarah found herself watching it all with wonder. This was what they'd built. Not just a way station, but a community where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where her Apache medicine worked alongside Doc Henley's modern treatments in their infirmary, where Thornton taught Shakespeare to Chinese children and basic English to Apache adults, where Samuel trained young men of all colors in blacksmithing and hunting. Mama Sarah, Rebecca ran up, braids flying. William says to tell you the Jensen baby's fever broke. Your willow bark tea worked. Sarah smiled, ruffling the girl's hair. The Jensen family, Norwegian immigrants, had arrived yesterday with a sick infant, working together with the minister's wife, who knew traditional Norwegian remedies. They'd found the right combination to help. As night fell, Samuel found her on their favorite bench, overlooking the moonlit valley. Regrets, he signed. Never, she replied, leaning into his warmth. We chose to build rather than hide. Look what grew from that choice. He pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching lights twinkle in the windows of the homes and buildings spread throughout the valley. Somewhere, Thornton was reading to the children. The minister was counseling a troubled traveler. The Chinese traders were sharing tea with the Jewish peddler, comparing roots and goods. Do you remember? Samuel said softly. That first winter, Just us in my cabin, thinking we'd found all we needed in each other. We had, Sarah replied. But we found more, didn't we? Purpose, family, community. The children want to know, he said with a slight smile. When we're going to give them another brother or sister. Sarah laughed. At our age, I think 5 is enough. Besides, we're grandparents now. Their oldest, Mary, had married last year and was expecting her first child, a baby who would grow up in a world where their mixed heritage was a source of strength, not shame. A coyote howled in the distance, and Samuel automatically checked the livestock pens, though he knew William had already secured them. The boy was reliable beyond his years, shaped by loss but not broken by it. Like all of them. Morrison will make trouble, Sarah said eventually. Probably. Samuel agreed. But look at what stood with us today. Not just people we've helped, but people who believe in what we're building. That's stronger than one man's hate. She turned in his arms, studying his face in the moonlight. The scars were still there, but they no longer defined him. Have I told you today that I love you? Only 3 times. He teased. I was beginning to worry. She kissed him, slow and deep, still feeling that spark after all these years. When they parted, she whispered, "Thank you." For what? For stopping when you found me in that ravine, for seeing me as more than a broken thing, for building this life with me. Sarah, he said, framing her face with his hands. You saved me just as much. I was the walking dead before you. Now. He gestured at the bustling station. The lives they'd touched, the family they'd created. Now I'm alive. They made their way back to their cabin, past the bunkhouse where travelers told tales by the fire, past the school where tomorrow's lessons waited, past the infirmary where healing happened in multiple traditions. William was showing the younger children constellation patterns, his voice patient and warm. Mary Chen was helping her husband with inventory in their store. Rebecca was practicing her letters, determined to be as educated as any white woman, inside their home. Sarah and Samuel came together with the passion of young lovers and the tenderness of long partnership. They moved together in the dance they'd perfected over years, giving and receiving pleasure in equal measure, reaffirming their bond in the most primal way. Later, as they lay entwined, Samuel traced the silver in her hair. Beautiful, he murmured. Flatterer. She accused, but smiled. We're getting old. Samuel Boone. Good. He replied. Means we survived. Means we get to see what comes next. What came next? They couldn't fully imagine. The world was changing, railroads pushing further west, territories becoming states, old ways clashing with new, but whatever came, they'd face it as they'd faced everything else, together, with courage, with love, and with a commitment to building bridges where others built walls. Outside, an owl called, and the night wind sang through the valley. In the bunkhouse, a traveling musician played his fiddle, the melody drifting on the air, a tune that spoke of home, of journey's end, of peace found after long wandering. Sarah pressed closer to Samuel, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her palm. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. Morrison would likely return with more men, more authority, more hate. But tonight, in this moment, they were safe. They were home. They were loved. Sleep, my heart, Samuel whispered, his voice still a wonder to her even after all these years of hearing it. Only if you promise to be here when I wake, she whispered back. Their old ritual. Always, he promised, as he did every night. Always and forever. And in the valley between the mountains, where a way station had become a beacon of hope, where 2 broken people had built something whole and beautiful, sleep came gently. Tomorrow they would stand again for what they believed in, fight if necessary for the world they'd created. But tonight, they rested in each other's arms. Proof that love could indeed conquer all, not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the daily choice to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than wound, to open doors rather than close them. The mountain man was silent no more, and the Apache widow had found her voice. Together, they had written a story of redemption that would echo through generations, of love that transcended prejudice, of courage that faced down hate, and of the simple, revolutionary act of seeing humanity in everyone who sought shelter from the storm. In the end, that was their greatest victory, not just surviving, but thriving, not just finding love, but spreading it, not just building a way station, but creating a home for all who needed one. And in the Montana mountains, under stars that had witnessed so much pain and so much healing, their love story continued, quiet as a whisper, strong as the mountains, eternal as the wind through the pines. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love and redemption in the Old West. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Sarah and Samuel's journey. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to hear what you think of their story.